5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short.
Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Puck Short podcast. It is Wednesday the 6th of April 2016 and as always I'm your host Rob McGregor. Riley Emmerson, head coach of the Edinburgh Capitals, joining me later in the show to talk about the EIHL playoff finals weekend, which happened a couple of days ago, obviously, being Wednesday and all that. The Capitals' somewhat difficult season. They started brightly and then kind of petered out with injuries and some player departures. So good to get Riley's take on that after a difficult first season as head coach of the team, or player coach of the team, as it was. A little bit of NHL news, chatter, so forth. Before we move into that, playoff qualification is almost entirely locked up now. Out west, it is done and dusted. The 8 teams who will be competing in the postseason have been decided. Dallas, St. Louis, Chicago, Anaheim, Los Angeles, San Jose, Nashville and Minnesota. The latter 2 taking the wildcard spots. And yeah, it's been interesting for a period of the season. It looked at one point whether maybe Arizona might sneak in there, and they kind of petered away. Minnesota, despite losing 4 in a row, did have enough of an advantage on the Avs, however, who lost against Nashville last night, in fact, the 5th. And that ended the Avs season prematurely, maybe some might say, or put it out of its misery. Others might say interesting times again in Denver, as some friction, shall we say, between Patrick Roy and Matt Duchene after the game the other night. Duchene getting a bit of heat from his coach for a rather outlandish celebration to celebrate his first 30-goal campaign. Now, interesting point by Jibble Scribbits, who's a Avs blogger. Some of you may be familiar with him on Twitter. He said basically, the fans need something to cheer. So how can you have a problem with what Duchene did in those circumstances? You take his point. Sometimes, even in bad seasons, people need things to cheer, and that's what's been probably so difficult in places like Edmonton. It is the way there's been so much promise, and it's just petered out to almost nothingness. So, could be interesting to see what happens in Denver this summer, especially as Matt Duchene was obviously mentioned in trade rumours earlier in the season. But as I said, in the West, the 8 teams who are going to go through to the Stanley Cup playoffs have been decided. In the East, 7 of the 8 are also set. Washington, clear winners of the President's Trophy, 117 points, and they've still got 3 games to go. Pittsburgh, second in the Metro, 102 points. They're also there after a tremendous run under Mike Sullivan. 7 wins in a row, 9-1-0 in their last 10, and they play extremely well. Malkin's hurt and Fleury's hurt. Neither ideal moving into the playoffs. But the way they've been playing right now, you kind of feel like they might even be able to ride that out if Malkin and Fleury can come back early-ish in the postseason. Be interesting to see what happens with Fleury. It's liable to be a concussion again, which I think is his second of this season, which could be problematic maybe. Having another one so quickly. But Matt Murray's a pretty strong prospect in the pipes, and he'll do well for them. Interesting to see how he fares in the playoffs. It's a big test for a rookie goaltender. But yeah, Fleury's had a great year. I think he's probably in the Vezina conversation. As a dark horse, I think, but he's been very strong for Pittsburgh all year, even when they were struggling earlier in the season. He was kind of bringing it, and as we're talking about Vezina candidates, it's a good segue into the New York Rangers, who have also clinched their spot. Henry Lundqvist, again, a candidate for the Vezina, who's kind of propped up the Rangers a few times this year. They've made it, and they've looked good at times. They've also looked poor at times, and really lent heavily on the veteran Swede. Over in the Atlantic Division, Florida, division winners. Fantastic season they've had. Tampa Bay also have made it. Their main concern right now, although, is the loss of Steven Stamkos, out for probably a couple of months at least with blood clot issues. There was a report they had to have a rib removed as part of the surgery to clean that up. Not pleasant for Stamkos at all. A huge blow for the Lightning, who'd already lost Anton Strahlman to injury along the blue line. So Tampa have lost 2 key members of their team right there just before the postseason, both likely to miss significant time in the playoffs as well. So that could be a big, big problem for the Lightning. Detroit currently hold 3rd in the Atlantic, but they are tied on points with Philadelphia, who they play in their next game, and Boston, who also have 91 but lose on the tiebreaker. Philadelphia, perhaps most importantly, have 4 games left in their schedule. Boston only have 2, Detroit 3. So, and especially if the Flyers win tonight, that could be key for Dave Haxtell's side, who also signed Alex Lyon, the Yale University goaltender, one of the most coveted free agent NCAA players this summer. Kind of surprised he went to Philly, who traditionally haven't had a lot of goalie depth. Well, all of a sudden they do now. They've got Neuwirth, Mason for another year, Tomic, now Lyon, Stollatz, sorry. I mean, for a team that never had any goaltending, suddenly they've got a bit of depth there and they're looking pretty decent for themselves. And Steve Mason's another guy who's got to be a serious candidate for the Vezina, I think. Over the course of the whole season, obviously the Flyers having that late run into the postseason, that's always going to help his candidacy, I think, because people tend to kind of pay attention to what happens at the end of the year more than at the start. Though that said, I think the media campaign behind Braden Holtby is probably going to see the Caps netminder home, especially if he breaks a single season wins record, which he might. They lost in overtime to the Islanders last night, but he's still got a couple of games in which to do, as I mentioned earlier, 3 games left on the Cap schedule. So opportunity still there for Holtby to do that. But that battle for that last couple of places, obviously Boston could overtake Detroit in the Atlantic. Philadelphia can only take that wild card spot, as the Metropolitan Division is full, and I don't think they're going to be able to catch the Islanders anyway. If we're honest, the Islanders have got 3 games left and a 6-point advantage on the Flyers. So you'd have thought the Islanders would have win at least probably one of those, if not 2 of those remaining games, to see themselves safe in that first wildcard spot, or as safe as one can be. Anyway, that'll do me for the NHL news. I think it's winding down a little bit, probably a little bit more next week's show, as the final playoff pace in the East will be done, and several teams will be hitting the golf course, and maybe a few coaches will be out of a job by this time next week as well. So interesting heading into this weekend with some key games going on in that Eastern Conference, and even a little bit of maybe jockeying for position at the bottom end with the draft lottery, which comes up later this month, April 30th, I think it is, offhand. So there might be a couple of teams just easing into the what should we call it? The off season, the summer break, whatever. So gonna be fun. I think a couple of teams, as I say, might throw a few kids out there and see what they can do before the year is done. One Puck Short is brought to you in association with Eastside Hockey Manager, an in-depth ice hockey management simulation brought to you by Sports Interactive and Sega, developers of the world-famous Football Manager series, available now for PC via Steam. Joining me now on the One Puck Short podcast, head coach of the Edinburgh Capitals. Please welcome to the show, Riley Emmerson. Hi, Riley. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for catching up with me today. Obviously, we're both at the EIHL playoff final weekend in Nottingham this weekend just gone. Nottingham Panthers lifting the trophy on the Sunday. I thought it was a pretty good weekend of hockey all in all. How did you see the weekend?
I absolutely loved it. Just the atmosphere and the energy that playoff weekend brings. It's 10 teams, 10 different hockey families all becoming one hockey family. Just for the love of hockey is amazing. Like, the streets are packed with jerseys from everywhere, and everyone's so nice to each other. And, for me and my first experiences, a playoff weekend was amazing. I think, maybe trying it over in North America would be great. Maybe for college towns or college cities or something like that. It would be a really good event, because it is a big fun time where everyone gets to know each other and have some fun, and it's a blast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and as you said, getting all the different fan bases together like that is a pretty unique opportunity, because we have the Challenge Cup, but that tends to be the 2 main fan bases and a few stragglers who've come along to see how it goes. But that 2-day weekend, all the stuff that goes on around the rink and obviously in the evenings as well is a great experience. And I mean, this is obviously in your second season in the Elite League now. As you mentioned, it's your first time attending the playoff finals weekend. How do you see the Elite League as a league in comparison to where you've played before in North America and sort of the wider hockey world?
I think, when I first got over here, like my first year in Edinburgh, the hockey, last year wasn't as good as like the American League that I previously played in. It was a bit better than the East Coast League. Kind of in between for me. But this year, the level of standard that it increased and it got better was just phenomenal. Like, every shift counts, every game counts for points, as you could tell the teams that were fighting for the league titles, and even the guys at the bottom. Even those guys are scraping to get every point, but any team could win on every night, and it was amazing to see. And next year with the import level going up, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned that everybody seemed pretty competitive, certainly early in the year, and I'll use that as a segue to move into the Capital season, because you guys had a pretty positive start this year, and you're pushing some good teams really close, and at one point it looked like you might make the playoffs this season, and it kind of tailed off towards the end. How was your first season as head coach of the Edinburgh Capitals?
It was definitely a big learning curve. For myself, it was it was a step, in the right direction at the first start of the year, but towards the end, it kind of sucked. But for myself as a first-year coach, I learned a lot, and I really felt I relished it. And I thought, obviously losing all those players and everyone getting hurt kind of sucks. So like when everyone criticizes the Caps team or organization for this year, I don't think that's really fair. I know at the start of the year we had a good sized budget, more than Scott Neal had ever given before. And we were beating every big club. And I said it pretty boldly on Premier Sports. If we had our original roster from the start of the year that I recruited, maybe made one tweak, maybe brought in another defenseman or something like that, I honestly think we would have been pushing to win the league. And of course, if like Carson Schubach didn't get hurt, like Carson's one of the best goalies in the league. Like he was saving 60 shots a night for us at times, and we were winning games or we were just losing games. And I think we had 4 games all year where we had a full import roster.
Yeah.
So, and for myself, our Brits really stepped up. I had a 17-year-old kid, Tyler Plews, that I didn't think I was going to give any shifts to all year, and this kid ended up playing 25, 30 minutes a night for myself and playing well.
Yeah.
And he got a taste of the elite league and how much better he has to improve, and and that's what I tried to sell the Capitals team on, as a stepping stone, and a stepping stone either to build yourself as a Brit or to build yourself as a player where you can make more money. And Ryan Hayes came in at 25 goals and something odd games for us. End up going to Sheffield, and Sheffield's a hard place to play in. You got to be on your game every day. You can't get away with the stuff you get away with in Edinburgh. Even David Rutherford going to Belfast. He jumped up, and it was Belfast is a big club, so he did. It was a stepping stone for him, and David and I have been friends for a really long time, so I was pretty choked, when he left, because I've known him for a long time, and I really wanted him to stay and help keep trying to turn our Capitals team around, and so I don't think anyone should criticize Scott for his job this year. Maybe it is tough that we did lose 29 of our last 30 games, but we played each one of those games with 12 players.
Yeah.
And guys were injured, and some Brits couldn't make it, and we don't we pay our Brits gas money pretty much. That's all we do. These guys have full-time jobs, and they don't get any money, and they still play for the level of the game. So, I think and Edinburgh could be such a good place. Our rink's old. Obviously, if it gets a little updating, make it more match friendly or family wise, stuff like that. Make some deals for schools and stuff like that. We could be a packed house every night, and get the Edinburgh Capitals name back on board. For all of Edinburgh to know that there's hockey here again, because half the people don't even know there's hockey here in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
So and all that, but I just see such great potential. That's why I took the job, because I see, I saw, what this team can be and what this organization can be. It just needs that one season or 1 or 2 seasons where it's a light switch, and things go the right way and all that. And it's not going to come easy. It's going to have a lot of elbow grease and a lot of work. And if I'm back next year, I honestly think I'm the man for the job. I'm extremely passionate about hockey. I know a lot of people. I want to help this club out. I want this team to do well, and if I don't come back, and then I still want this team to do well and improve and build. So there will be no hard feelings for me. My wife and my son and I love it here. We've fallen in love with the city. So but hockey wise, we showed great promise, but losing a couple guys, losing Jacob Johnson, and was a big hit. But then Hayes and Rutherford left, and I broke my arm, and it was just a list that when everything could go wrong, it went wrong.
Yeah.
But to the non-import or to the imports that stayed, kudos to you guys. I know Trevor Gerling could have jumped ship any minute. He had every single East Coast team after him, and he didn't want to leave. He was like, I'm not going anywhere. I want to build my name even more here. And I think he's probably had every single team in the league call him already. And he's going to be a wanted man. He's a guy who brings it every night. And then we brought some guys in like little Garrett Milan, who proved himself that they can play in this league and be a really good player. And it was great. So and then Nikita Koznikov comes in, gets invited to the national, the Latvian national team tryouts.
Yeah.
So it's huge. So like I said, Edinburgh is a stepping stone that in time can turn into a big club. So we definitely have the city for it. The Murrayfield Ice Rink is old, but I'm actually literally driving by it right now. It's really old. But, it's really old, but you can't tell me when a visiting team comes into Murrayfield, they go, oh my gosh, we got to play here today. And then if we come out flying, it's a tough, we had 12 skaters against Brighthead at the end of the year, and we were 3-3 with them. So 10 minutes left or 7 minutes left in the game. And we had our backup in who did a heck of a job. We had them on our heels. We had a lot of teams on our heels this year, and kudos to all my players this year. They fought to the end. It was amazing. And our fan base is small and loyal, and it's slowly growing, and they stick by us through thick and thin. And, I think everyone should tip their hat to those guys. It's like a lot of people could have just thrown the towel in and went and seen fights or went and saw Brighthead, but they came to watch us and the Capitals, and it was great.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there that the guys who left, Ryan Hayes obviously was quite a public departure, closely followed by David Rutherford. And as you also mentioned, you weren't shy about how you'd sold the Capitals to guys coming in, and you were quite public that, this is what I'm selling the team as, and I hope we can do well. And was it something you expected to happen in season, though, or did you think maybe they'd have a year with Edinburgh and then see what their options were moving forward, or did it come as a surprise that they left kind of when they did, so to speak, especially when the team was still doing pretty well, but by all standards?
Yeah, well, when we were doing well, we were winning. No one wanted to leave at all. Everyone saying it was great here. They didn't. We're not the team's not run perfect off the ice. I don't think people everyone knows that. It's tough. It's tough getting places here during the festival. Scotty and I already talked about he's going to be getting places even earlier this year. So he's going to fork out an extra month's rent for no one who's even going to live there, just to make sure guys have places. Cars are getting lined up for next year. We're already got plans to hopefully redo our dressing room so it's a bit bigger and feels more home-like. And I think when guys got here, it was a big culture shock. It's not that I didn't tell them it wasn't. I told them 100%, this is what you're getting yourself into, but this is where you could be, because you're going to, Ryan Hayes could have went to Nottingham. We were out, we were bidding with them all summer for him, and he could have went to Nottingham, and, he could have got caught in a big club, and, a couple mistakes here or there, he's could have been the odd man out or something like that. And, here he couldn't get away with it. Could be, we don't have the luxury of having 4 lines. Sometimes we only have 2 lines, and that's just how it goes. So he got to play, but David Rutherford. So I think maybe when the opportunity did come up, because we were losing a lot, we lost a lot of games in a row, and I think those guys saw the opportunity to maybe step up. And for me, there's no hard feelings anymore. I know why they did it. I used to be a player. If I had the opportunity to go play for the Sheffield Steelers, if I'm leading our league in scoring, maybe make an extra $1 or $2, I would do it if I was young. Stuff like that. But there's no hard feelings. But obviously, we need guys who want to come in, want to stick with it for the whole year. And those guys, if we were winning all the time, probably wouldn't have left.
Yeah.
So that's personally what I feel. Personally, that's what I feel. But we were losing a lot of games, and it just wasn't. It wasn't fun. Edinburgh's we had a close knit group, but it wasn't fun losing every game. It sucked.
Yeah.
But what can you do? But, I think in the long run, there's so much potential in this city and even this organization, there's a lot that can go right here, and hopefully it happens soon.
Yeah, you mentioned Tyler Plews earlier on, and the big job he did stepping up in some difficult times with injuries, and obviously, as we mentioned, some guys moving on. How important is the local junior development, do you think, to hockey in Edinburgh? And in years gone by, obviously the Hand brothers were the big names in Tony particularly, but also places like Fife always had good junior development as well in years past. Is that a big part of the club's future, do you think, being able to get sort of the local junior development on board and producing good local kids like Tyler?
Oh, it's huge. I think it's good for the whole GB program. For myself, it's not just for us; it's for every team, because the better your Brits are, the better your team's going to be in the long run, because you're going to have that much more depth. Tyler Plews did great. I actually was fortunate enough last night to watch I think it might have been Scotland under 20 or Scotland under 19 team practice. I just popped into the rink quick, and they're practicing. These are a lot of kids that, were pushing the pace, and it was good to see that there was, a lot of young kids that are hungry, and these guys were just the first couple warm-up drills, and these guys were going 100 miles an hour, pushing themselves, and that's good to see, because the better development they're going to have, the better development's going to be for all GB and for all our elite league clubs, so that if they do come into our elite league, it's, they don't have to develop too much, because obviously, we aren't a developmental league. We're here to win, and we're here to do it now. And if you're a Briton, you can't play. You're not going to play.
Yeah.
That's why I've talked to a couple of our guys who say, I might go, like Jay King and Callum Boyd, who have, guys who have some potential. I might go to these big clubs now. So I say, well, I want to let you know, if you go to these big clubs and you mess up, there's no saving grace for you guys. Like, you guys are still a bit young and raw. Like, you guys could, use a couple more. Personally, I say that use a couple more years of just practicing with the guys and getting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 shifts a game where you're learning from all the guys. So the development program's huge, just for the whole, for everything here. So hopefully it all it all keeps going. And I know like Tyler's dad, Scott Plews, does a great job over there helping with everything else and all that. So it's huge, because it's going to make the league even better. And honestly, I think raising the import level makes the non-imports better. Because they have to be that much better in practice. The pace in practice picks up. Everything escalates higher and higher to increase the pace, and these guys then get better and better and better in practice.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a couple of times that you believe Edinburgh could be a really strong club in the league. And I know it's something I've sort of said before on the podcast on Twitter, that I think that the Capitals are kind of a sleeping giant in a sense. They're in a great city, and huge population area up there. They've got a bit of history as well, as I mentioned Tony Hand before and things. What is it that kind of, in your opinion, needs to happen? What's the big thing to unlock the Capitals' potential within that city? Because it always seems like they're kind of just bubbling under the surface from maybe doing really well for themselves. There just seems to be something holding them back, and I can never quite put my finger on what it is.
Honestly, I just think it's a winning season. Like, a winning season where everyone's like, oh no, because if it's a losing season for the Caps, everyone's like, oh, same old Cap. But if it's, I honestly just think it's a winning season, and it's a winning season where a group of guys come in, and they're ready to work, and they know what's at stake, and they know that if they help turn an organization around that's been a lower end club and all that, they can open a lot of eyes, and just shows their character and all that stuff. So honestly, I just think it's a winning season, and a lot of guys, can get mad about Scott Neal and all that stuff. But, at the start of the year, his budget was, pretty good. It was just up there with Fife or Dundee. And, obviously when we started losing and guys left, like, why would Scott want to forfeit all this money if, he's worried that players are just going to leave again?
Yeah.
And all that stuff. But, I just think it's a winning season where all the players are on board and everyone else, alongside of, with ownership and with everything's on board, and then we just help market hockey in Edinburgh and help get the name out that we are here. It's not the Merrifield Racers anymore, but we're the Edinburgh Capitals, but we're going to be just as good, and we're going to bring it every night for you guys and all that stuff. So honestly, I think that's all it is. It's just one winning season where, everything goes right, and obviously not everything goes right in hockey, but where it's just, everything just seems to fall into place, and we just get our name back on the map as a strong hockey team that are ready to rock and roll. And, and I'm excited, and I hope that I'm a part of it, because, like I said, this place can be absolutely amazing, and, the city is unbelievable, and everyone else is unbelievable around it. So I really hope that I am a part of it.
I think you've probably answered my next question there. What's next for Riley Emmerson?
I talked to Scott a bit today. We're going to sit down Monday. I don't leave till next week, so we'll sit back Monday and have a good chat, and and hopefully I can keep selling myself. But obviously it is tough when I am married, with a kid and a wife, and it's not just my fight over; it's 2 other fights over, and all that stuff, and it's my own place. But I've been here. I'm ready to bleed, Capitals hockey, and and help this place turn it around, because it's amazing. And it's not just that; it's just the Capitals fans deserve a winning season. They've went long enough without the team making the finals. They deserve the Capitals to make the playoff weekend. It's just an amazing experience. And, you can't tell me that we don't make playoff weekend. That place would be packed all the time.
Yeah,
it'd be absolutely awesome. And it'd be great, and it deserves to get everything else back on board and ready to go. And it's going to be a heck of a time. So, and a heck of an experience for everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join me today, Riley. I really appreciate it.
No worries, anytime.
One puck short.
And there we go. Thanks very much again to Riley for taking the time out to join me today. You can follow him on Twitter at MO059. That's EMMO059. And first class guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him at the weekend. He was part of the Premier Sports commentary team along with Aaron Murphy and Paul Addy. I thought he did a bang up job. Watching it, I watched it again yesterday. In fact, I had a little bit of involvement with the Elite League's media stuff over the weekend. Great opportunity for myself that I really enjoyed. So thanks to Seth Bennett and the guys at Elite League for giving me the chance to get involved there and help out. And thanks to everybody who passed on their feedback. A lot of it was very positive, which is always nice to hear. So yeah, I met a lot of great people. Finally met a few folk face to face that I've conversed with online many a time, but haven't had the chance to catch up with. John O'Bullard from Cat's Whiskers, and Tom Darnell, the referee as well, and a whole heap of other people. Too many to mention. Met some really great people that I'm honoured to have had the chance to talk to. Stuart Roberts, Ice Hockey Annual, I had a great chat with him on the Saturday night, and he's still pushing to try and get that ice rink back in Brighton, so good luck to Stuart on that one. But really great to meet someone who's been around the game in Great Britain for so long, and just pick his brain a little bit on a few things. But overall, I thought the Elite League playoff weekend was pretty good. I thought certainly the second semi-final between Nottingham and Fife was closer than the score might have suggested. I thought Fife played very well, but Nottingham's defence was excellent, both on the Saturday and in the grand final on Sunday against the Coventry Blaze. Cardiff obviously going to be disappointed with what happened in the first semi-final. Coventry played an excellent game against the Devils. I thought they really had their game plan down and soaked up a bit of pressure at times, but they hit Cardiff on the break several times. I think one guy, it was Paddy from A View from the Bridge, a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show, who said it was like the parting of the Red Sea. In a beautiful metaphor there, with Cardiff's defence just caught so many times by the Blaze forwards who broke up with great speed, and it always looked like it would be an interesting clash in the final with Nottingham, and sure enough it was a really decent game, I thought. And I know some people thought maybe it was over after the Panthers scored that first goal, but Coventry kept coming. But the way Panthers played in their own zone at the weekend, it was hard to get a lot of quality chances on Mika Weekman, who was good when called on. I thought Brian Stewart was excellent again, as you've come to expect from Brian Stewart really in Coventry. So yeah, great weekend. Great to meet those of you who I met, and thanks for all the kind comments about the podcast here and the stuff that went on at the weekend. And long may it continue, hopefully, and enjoy your summers for those of you who are going to take a bit of a break from hockey now. For those of you sticking around for the NHL playoffs, obviously I'll still be here for a little bit longer this season yet. I'll go into probably into May, June time, and I'm looking forward to it. As I mentioned earlier, some of the playoff paces are done. There's two up for grabs in the East. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out over the next, few days. Saturday's the last round of regular season games, if I remember rightly. So, eagerly keeping my eye on those ones to see who does make it in the East. Philadelphia, Detroit and or Boston. 2 of those 3 will go through. As I said before, Philadelphia need to get that wildcard spot, so big pressure on them to perform, but they've got the advantage from that extra game on Detroit. But I think I've waffled enough for this week. Thanks very much again to my guest Riley Emmerson. As I said, you can follow him on Twitter at mo059. You can follow me on Twitter at robmcgregor35. You can email onepuckshort at gmail.com. You can find the website onepuckshort.wordpress.com. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/onepuckshort. If you're an iTunes subscriber, please consider leaving a review whether you love the show, hate the show. Either way, it's great to get the feedback from all the people at home and to see what you like, what you don't, and so forth. And equally, if you are so inclined, there is a PayPal donation button on the website, onepuckshort.wordpress.com, just on the right-hand side. If you think we're worth £1, if you think we're worth $10, if you think we're worth €56, 11 drachma, if you've got them kicking around, whatever. It all gets funneled back into the show, hosting, equipment, and stuff like that. So it's all gratefully received, and as I said, it all gets funneled back into the show. So that's enough waffling for me for 1 week. Thank you very much to everybody at home for joining me, and I'll speak to you all again very soon.